Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to welcome my guest today, Charlotte Hammond, who has come along to share her recovery story. So I am super excited to dive into this. A very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
So this is going to be really fun. To begin with, would you mind just saying a little about yourself and maybe your life before COVID?
So I am 30 years old. Before COVID, I was living in Birmingham. I was head of English and modern foreign languages in a quite tough, quite big school. I had my own house, I had cats, and I was quite a busy person. I was always doing things. I went out a lot with my friends, and I think I was somebody who wasn't brilliant at giving myself a break for things. I think I was somebody who was quite, I guess they call it type A. And then sort of in the months before I got COVID, I had a really tough time at work. So my nervous system was like not in a good place anyway. And I moved to a new school, which was very, everyone was working 12-hour days, and, there wasn't a culture of taking a break. I mean, my manager, he'd had a heart attack and hadn't taken a break, so it was a very intense environment, and that's when I fell ill. So it's kind of a perfect storm, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably need to be careful about stereotyping because there's exceptions to every rule, but there certainly does seem to be quite a pattern with people who are working a lot of hours, maybe in quite a stressful environment, maybe doing quite a lot else on top of that.
Yeah.
I was exactly the same. And, I didn't see this as being a problem. I just thought this was what I did. And, if someone had turned around and said to me, you're doing quite a lot, I would just be like, yeah, I do. But I don't think I even really noticed it because I was surrounded by other people who were doing the same. So why was it a problem if I was doing it, if everybody else was as well? And I suppose that's where we come along with this thing. Well, why did this happen to me? And it didn't happen to all these other people who were also living the same lifestyle. And I suppose that's the question, isn't it?
Thing they don't know, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, it is. I can relate to a lot of what you just said in my own pre-COVID lifestyle for sure. So it sounds like you actually probably got ill at school.
So I'm pretty sure, obviously you can never be 100%, but a colleague of mine got COVID a few days before I did. So I think it's pretty likely that I picked it up at the school. And I think, for a while I had a lot of emotions around that, because I think, COVID safety protocol isn't, that there aren't that many rules about what has to happen in schools. And I think our school was on the more lax end of that. So I think that was something that for a long time I found quite difficult, kind of watching people not following guidelines, and more so watching people getting COVID and getting quite ill from it and then not taking a break afterwards. I was like, no, please take a break, because I didn't. I decided that being ill meant that I should try and, clean the house and get all the jobs done that I hadn't done when I was exhausted. And that was obviously just the worst thing I could have done. So yeah, I think that was something for a while that I had to learn to kind of accept, that people are going to do their own thing, and people have to learn their own lessons about it, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, like we were saying before about, there being certainly a lot of people with this kind of sort of personality lifestyle that end up with long COVID. We are exactly the sort of people that do the worst possible thing when we get sick.
Yeah.
Because we're always busy, we're like, oh, well, I'm ill, I'm not going to let that stop me. Again, that was sort of what I did, and certainly I've heard the same from quite a few other people. And it's interesting how your perspective changes once you've kind of entered this world, isn't it? Because I remember, during my journey, I was looking at other people who were, getting COVID left, right, and centre. And I was thinking, partly, why are you putting yourself in the position where you're going to get it? Because look what happened to me. But also, please don't make the same mistakes that so many of us have made before. We know that this is a nasty virus. Yes, we know that some people seem to be okay, but we also know that plenty of people aren't. So, please respect your body, and don't push through. But, plenty of people did. And, plenty of people did seem to get away with it, but so many didn't. And I think, yeah, seeing it from this other side, certainly for me, was actually quite triggering.
Yeah.
I think looking at people, trying to push through, trying to keep working, trying to, as you say, clean the house.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's one of those things that's when you're like, quote unquote, young, fit, and healthy, you feel indestructible. And the thought that this could happen to you is like, well, it won't happen to me because I'm young, fit, and healthy, or, whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
So when was it that you actually got ill?
So it's the end of October 2021. So it was just at the beginning of my half term. So I was gutted. Obviously, looking back, that was not the big tragedy it felt like at the time. I was like, oh my God, I'm missing a week of like fun things. And it turns out it was longer. So yeah, I got ill then. And just the same as a lot of other people, I wasn't like ill enough remotely that I ever considered needing to go to hospital or anything like that. My breathing wasn't great. I was just so fatigued, and it just felt like it was going to go away. And of course, it just didn't. And it just kept sort of dragging on. I tried to go back to work after kind of 2 weeks off and went back in for 3 days and just made myself so much iller, which I think a lot of people did. And I remember kind of sitting in a meeting with someone at work and just thinking, I'm not going to be able to work here. They weren't in a place where they could really let me take my foot off the pedal as well. And I was like, this just isn't going to work. So yeah, I kind of had to come to terms with that really early on, that I wasn't going to have the job I loved anymore. And then it just kind of developed from there, really.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose again, it's, we talk about reasonable adjustments and things like this in the workplace. And, I also worked in education, and, like just going back in a way that would work for me just wasn't really an option. You maybe, if your employer had allowed you, certain things, then maybe there might have been ways to do it. But I think, like, looking back on it, for me, education is such a stressful environment, or it certainly can be such a stressful environment, that stress on top of you not being anywhere near 100% actually would have been the worst thing for me to do, would be to have tried to go back, I think. But there were so many people that did because they felt they had to, or maybe they did have to financially. And thinking about that kind of stress, and education is not going to be the only stressful job environment in the world, but that's one I have personal experience of for sure. And yeah, just kind of thinking back to the sort of the stress it put on me even before I was ill. It is very, very interesting, isn't it? A lot of people who have recovered that I've spoken to did allow themselves to take that time off and did just let their body do it, or find the things that help, but they needed a bit of a clean kind of break. Anyway, we've totally sidetracked there. You were talking about your initial illness, and did that just kind of develop into long COVID? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, just at first it was just not getting better, and it was just going on, and then it did start to get worse. I think a lot of it was, I lived on my own, and that was fine when I was out and about and doing things, but my friends were all in their 20s. They didn't know what to do. And my sort of older friends, people who would have come around and helped me with things, lived in other places. So I was a bit isolated, and I was trying to do everything myself still. And, I just kept getting iller. So eventually it took me kind of 4 months or so to make the decision. I moved back in with my parents. So I'm now in the countryside in Buckinghamshire. And that was just the only thing that would have worked. It was just the best thing to do. I was lucky I was a homeowner, so I was able to rent my house out, and financially I kind of kept afloat that way. But it was a really tough decision. But like, a lot of people say with long COVID, you just really have to pare it right back to, what you can do and what your energy levels will allow. And it's shocking how little that is at first. I was managing maybe 5-minute walks, when I was at my worst, quite often not even that, not leaving the house. And it was such a change. But then slowly did start to get better. So it took a few months to kind of get to the point where I wasn't declining and I was actually kind of improving.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point about it. Just a quote unquote healthy person cannot understand just how little someone with long COVID or any chronic condition, I would imagine, can actually do. And that was something I really struggled with to start with because, I was a very active person beforehand. So I was like, oh, well, I just need to do a little bit less. So, I can still try to go running. It didn't go well. And, yeah, I was trying to do too much, far, far, far too much for far too long. And like you, I was getting worse and worse and worse. But it took me quite a long time to really find that kind of, I don't know, people call it baseline, don't they, of how little I could do before I wasn't actually getting worse. And even then, some of those days were, you wouldn't describe them as enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely not. When you're in that, it can feel like a very isolating experience. And I think because it's unlikely that you're going to have other people in your life who have the same condition, I think that's where things like this and like the online community is so important, because seeing other people who are having it and also other people who are getting better, I think if you didn't have that, it would feel like something that was just going to last forever. And there's just nothing worse than feeling awful and just thinking, I'm never going to feel better,
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, it's very isolating. And when you're kind of in it, especially when you're in a really bad kind of phase of it, it's like all hope is gone.
Yeah.
Everything is awful. There's no way that you can ever recover. It's not like, you can't even imagine having a slightly better day, when you're in that really kind of bottom of the trough kind of thing. And I was quite lucky to have a supportive partner, but in some ways, even having him almost sometimes made it feel worse because I was comparing myself to him and what we used to be doing. And, I suppose it's a very different thing. I remember saying to him at one point, I can't even imagine what this would have been like if I'd been on my own. Like, I was no way I would have coped. But at the same time, I think life would have been much more about, I need to survive, so today's energy is going to go on making dinner. Whereas what I was thinking was, well, he's making dinner, so what else can I do? Which was a terrible idea, and it was making me worse. And it took me a long time to realize that actually, if he was making dinner, that meant that I could rest and not try to do other things. And that was when I started to sort of see some improvement, was when I stopped trying to do things that I shouldn't be. But it was just this idea of the things that you shouldn't be doing were just so unimaginably small that you couldn't comprehend it when you're still kind of in that previous kind of, I don't know, it was almost like it took a long time for my brain to adjust to the new circumstances.
To catch up. Yeah. I think people expect you to be a different person from the moment you get ill, and you're still the same person in your head. I remember quite early on in my illness, I was having a slightly better day and I'd managed like a 5-minute stroll. I hadn't been out the house for a while, and I sort of told my friend, and she was like, oh, that's good. And I was like, no, it isn't. Because I was still I was like, you wouldn't say it was good if you'd only managed to get out the house for 5 minutes. I was quite annoyed when she said that, but obviously like her heart was in the right place, and she was just thinking of me as this new person, this sick person, but I was still my old self in my head, and to some extent I still am, but I'm also massively changed. It's a funny thing, really.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting thing to talk about, actually. But I would love to hear a little bit about what you found that helped.
So I was really, really lucky in that we were able to have a few meetings with a private doctor who was incredible. And the reason he was so good, one of the reasons was he's had long COVID himself. And he treated the whole person. And that was something that I was really missing sort of before. So he didn't say it's all in your head, but he equally recognized that the brain and the body are so connected and that all of these things sort of come together. So I found quite a few different things helpful in the early stages. I changed my diet, and that was really great. So I went gluten-free, sugar-free. That was really, really helpful. And then also cold water. I think you love a bit of cold water swimming as well. Yeah.
Oh, I do. I do.
I always loved it, but I think when I couldn't exercise, I was like, oh, I can't do that. But actually, just getting in the cold water is obviously so good for you. And just cold showers and stuff are really good. So that was helpful. But I think also just kind of, he gave me the permission to celebrate really, really small wins and to kind of have new aims in life. I think because he understood where I was at, it really helped me. He understood it better than I did. It really helped me to scale back my expectations, and find that baseline a lot quicker than I would have done otherwise. So that was the main thing that helped me kind of in the early stages.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I was saying earlier, it took me a long time to realize how little I should be doing. And I think, I spent quite a lot of time doing the wrong things. And I think if I hadn't spent so long doing the wrong things and I had found some of the right things earlier on, actually, I probably would have recovered quicker. But at the same time, berating myself for doing the wrong things is kind of not helpful, is it? But that's really interesting that you kind of managed to get onto that kind of idea a little bit quicker. It certainly seems to have maybe helped.
Just because of the help, really. I mean, the very first doctor I went to see told me to walk every day and do all this stuff, which I started doing, and but very quickly felt iller. So I was very, very lucky to kind of be put in touch with this particular person. Also, it wasn't just lifestyle stuff. He did also give me supplements. He gave me kind of like antihistamines and stuff, and that all really helped my body just to start repairing itself, and kind of felt big for me because it felt like he was legitimizing it, by kind of prescribing me things. It was like, this is an illness. This is not, you're just more tired than everyone else. And I think that was quite big as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think really being listened to
Yeah.
is so important, isn't it? I mean, you hear about a lot of people being gaslit by their doctors, which I'm sure is awful. I didn't experience that as such, but it was more possibly because I was ill very early on. It was like there were no doctors. There was nobody there to listen. There was nobody to say, we're not sure what's going on, but yes, you are ill. No, you're not the only person. There are other people out there, kind of thing. It was more that, actually even just getting hold of a doctor was impossible. And even then they'd like, what, you're just not ill enough for me to really have the time to listen to. So I think really being heard, I think we maybe underestimate that sometimes, don't we? When you're really, really struggling, you're really, really unwell, for someone just to sort of say, I hear you.
Yeah, I think I hear you. And then also, I'm curious about how we can make you better, because I think even hearing from a doctor, I hear you, but there's nothing I can do. You're so frustrated because you think, well, okay, but we need to do so. I can't just be ill like this forever. I was perfectly healthy before, and now I'm like, disabled, can't leave the house, like all of these things. And what was really important for me was that he was like, okay, well, if you're having this symptom, let's try this thing, let's try these things and see if it works. And it kind of felt like a dialogue, which obviously is what healthcare should be. So that was really huge. And then also, my parents were just on board from the start, and believed me, and could see how ill I was, and could see what worked and what didn't. And that was also living with people who were kind of backing me up and supporting me even when I didn't support myself was a really big thing as well. It's hard if you're on your own, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a really good support system in place, and you were lucky with your doctor that, as you say, not only did he hear you, but he also was willing to try things. Because you hear this quite a lot in healthcare. I think there's oh well, we don't really know what to do, so we won't try anything. And obviously there has to be a kind of a line, but there are so many things that could be tried that there is now evidence that that they're certainly helping people. So I think there are a lot of things that people should be encouraged or helped to try. I guess again, early on there was less knowledge of this, and even now, I think some doctors maybe are just quite scared of trying things. I mean, there's plenty of anecdotal evidence, but in terms of like actual papers and things, there probably isn't so much, because I suppose in terms of medicine and research and time and stuff, we are quite early days.
I mean, maybe some of the other people have had different experiences, but definitely my experience with the NHS, I've had maybe one helpful appointment. And I think a lot of the problem is that there are so many different things that are affected by long COVID for most people. I had things like, my hair was falling out, I had palpitations, I had all these different things. And I think doctors had a hard time believing it was all based on the same thing. I think, and that there was like a root cause to it all, because it just presented as quite complicated. So yeah, I think that's something that it's hard for the medical profession to get their head around a bit. And maybe my doctor, having had it himself, that's why he was more able to understand kind of where I was coming from with it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember somebody describing the healthcare system, and I don't think this is just the UK, I suspect it's probably kind of globally, as being kind of very siloed. You know, you have people who are very, very talented in their specialty, which is not a bad thing, I'm sure, but also it means that we lack this ability to be able to see the whole picture. So if somebody is very focused on one specific area of, say, the heart, you know, that's great if there's someone that has just a problem with their heart. But for somebody with long COVID, for example, where you've got palpitations and breathing problems and your gut's going crazy and your hair's falling out and you're, you know, all of these different things, it's actually, there's nobody really joining the dots in a kind of helpful way, isn't there? And I don't know, I'm an eternal optimist, I think. And I think one of my hopes is that, you know, out of all of this complete horror show of the last few years, that, you know, there will maybe be some silver linings, and maybe, you know, there'll be more understanding of chronic illness, for one, and more empathy to people who are suffering with that. But also that maybe the healthcare system will be able to see the person as a whole in a way that it doesn't at the moment. We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, so many people have kind of had various, you know, on the spectrum of long COVID, various things. I think it's hard to imagine that it won't improve and that it won't help other people with chronic illnesses, because, you know, stuff that's going to work for long COVID is going to work for chronic fatigue syndrome, all sorts of things, isn't it? So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's, you know, what triggered it in the first place. There's so many crossovers, and, you know, I think the debate is still raging about whether they are one and the same thing. But even if they're not, there's so many similarities that, as you say, you know, something that's going to work for one is at the very least going to benefit the other.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were talking about some of the things that helped you, and yeah, I'm a massive fan of the cold water as well. That's been a huge thing for me. How did things kind of progress from there?
So basically what that did is it helped me to reach a more functional baseline. Like, it meant that I was having a life that was worth living, really. You know, I was able to most days do something for 2 to 3 hours, whether that was I might go outside, or whether that was, you know, I like writing, whether it was doing a bit of writing, whatever. So that, obviously, my mental health went right up after kind of being able to do those things. And it kind of was slowly going up. And I think basically I managed to get some medication. I don't think I'm allowed to share the details of what I was able to get, but that sped up my recovery. I think, though, I was kind of slowly, you know, I was just kind of going up the steps. And I think, had I not been able to, not been very fortunate, and it kind of sped up, then I would have got there, but just got there a bit more slowly, maybe. But I think that's why these medical trials are so important, because it is, you know, it's a proper illness and it needs medication. Like, that there is a thing that is going wrong inside people's bodies, and that can be fixed. So I think it's great that they're doing these trials, and there's lots of hopeful kind of, you know, obviously we all read a lot around it, and there's lots of hopeful stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've noticed from speaking to other people and from my own experiences as well is that the body has a remarkable kind of capacity to heal itself. And, you know, that actually, if you put it into the right environment by, you know, taking away things that are stressful and replacing them with good things, that actually, you know, it will do a lot of things itself. But that doesn't mean that, I guess, medication doesn't have its place. You know, maybe it could, you know, help speed things up if your gut is really wonky, for example, or, you know, people talk about things like beta blockers, for example, for palpitations and things. And I didn't have access to all of that. I did it all naturally, but it took me a really long time. Whereas actually, if I'd maybe been able to access some of those medications earlier on, it might have sped up the process a little bit. I don't know, because I will not be able to live a parallel parallel version of myself to find out. But I think it all has its place.
Definitely. I think the main thing is just, for people who have it more severely, I think it's so important to know that it is worth doing all the little things that make your life a little bit better, because they are working on the big things, and I think for some people, without that bigger help, it is very challenging to kind of overcome, and particularly if your circumstances, you don't have enough money to be living the lifestyle that is the best for your body. I think it's really good to know that those things are out there and will happen, and I do really believe that they will sort it out. It's just going to take them a while, I think.
Yes, and I guess, as you say, in the meantime, there are lots of things that we can be doing that definitely will help, even if they're maybe slower going.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, something that I'm really curious about, because this is something that I've been through quite recently. How did you know that you were recovered? At what point, it's like things have been improving, things are now quite a lot better. Am I better? Am I not? Am I different? I mean, you said earlier you're a different person to what you were before. So how do you compare you now to you then? And yeah, what does recovery look like for you?
There's just a lot of big questions in there.
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's great. In terms of when I knew I was recovered, I think that's been like an interesting process, because there was an early point when I was like, I'm better. I woke up one day, I didn't have the vice-like grip anymore, I didn't have the fatigue, and I was like, oh my God, I'm better. And it was so euphoric, and it was just as euphoric, if not more so, than you think it's going to be, when you're dreaming about it. And ever since then, I do consider myself as not having long COVID, but that doesn't necessarily mean I am 100% where I was before, because obviously my body's taken a battering. I was really ill for a long time. So then there's been also the kind of the recovery period of just building my body's strength back up, and also like my tolerance to things. I can't be around lots of people for as long as I used to be able to. Like sensory stuff bothers me more than it used to be, because I've always had slight sensory issues and things, but it is worse since I've had long COVID, which I think is, predictable, but I didn't predict it. So when I started having these frustrations, I was like, I should be better now. You kind of go through this, I've earned it, I should be completely well. And I think it's continued to be a learning curve, just in terms of giving myself a break, and kind of giving my body a break and still giving it what it needs. So yeah, I would class myself as not having long COVID anymore, but I think I'm still not as fit as I was, for example, before. In terms of how I'm different though, if we ignore the physical part, I am just so much more mentally resilient now. I am a totally different person. I know myself better. I mean, it was a horrible experience, but I think I've got so much out of it. And I know that almost anybody who's had a chronic illness will say the same thing. It really changes your mindset.
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that. I just it's almost like you see things through a different lens. So I have a new appreciation of all sorts of things, the little things that I would really struggle with before, or even not be able to do. Now I'm just like, oh, look, a tree. That doesn't mean that I'm not dreaming big, but I definitely, yeah, have a kind of, yeah, a new appreciation for things that I can do. And I think maybe a new appreciation for other people and their suffering, because I've been there. So, I mean, many disabilities are not visible, but when you see somebody in the street, for example, like physically obviously disabled, and you'll look at them through new eyes. I think certainly for me, and think, oh gosh, right, I obviously can't know what they're thinking and what they're feeling, because nobody can ever do that for somebody else. But I definitely feel, yeah, a new kind of, I don't know, maybe empathy for people who have some difficulty in their life.
Yeah, I think for me as well, like a greater comfortability with kind of emotions in general, because I think I've always been before like quite considered myself quite a tough person, somebody who didn't really show emotions, and that was something I liked about myself. And now actually I realize that that's not the weight of life. And I think now I'm so much more comfortable if somebody does need support from me, or if somebody is upset in front of me, I kind of feel more naturally like I know what to do, and I feel more connected to other people, which is just such a lovely gift. So there are a lot of things with this illness that I am really, really grateful for, definitely.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting one, isn't it? I have told this story before, but I remember someone who I interviewed very early on, and I was really struggling at the time. I hadn't really found anything that helped yet. I was, getting on for 18 months in, and everything was awful. And she was a recovery story, and she said, yeah, I'm really grateful for my experience, and I'm glad I went through it because I've come out better the other side. I paraphrase. And I remember thinking, how can you, like, yeah, like, I cannot comprehend. And it's amazing how your perspective can change when you have recovered and you're looking back on it. And I think, well, that was 3 years of my life, and it was horrible and it was awful, and I wouldn't want to go through it again. And I'm not sure I would say I was grateful for it because, it was horrible. But at the same time, as you say, there are some good things to have come out of it. I have learned some new things. I've been kind of forced into this position where I've had to think differently about things. And I would say there definitely are some silver linings, even if I'm sort of a little bit, I don't know, yeah, about it. I don't even know what the word is for that.
I feel like it's fine for me to say there are silver linings, but if somebody else tried to say to me, you had silver linings from your illness, I would be like, absolutely not, stop talking to me. So I think it's a very personal thing, isn't it? And it's something that as ill people, we should be allowed to take ownership of ourselves, and we decide what we got out of it and what we didn't get out of it as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, and it comes back to us knowing our own bodies, us knowing, when a doctor says, oh, well, you can't possibly be feeling that. And I go, well, actually, how can you don't tell me what I am and I'm not feeling? It's like, your body best. You're able to reflect on your experiences and have your own thoughts about them. And it's not for somebody else to tell you how you should or shouldn't be feeling about that, whether you're in the middle of your illness or whether you're coming out the other side or whatever. And I wonder if it might be something that will change over time. At the moment I'm kind of just out of it, and I'm still trying to adjust to what life is like now. And it's exciting, but it's also, there's a lot of stuff that I wasn't expecting. So yes, of course, I'm able to look back and say, right, well, I learned a lot. Maybe in 2 years' time, when I'm off living the dream, I might be able to look back and say, actually, okay, maybe now with a bit more time, I'm able to think slightly different about it. I don't know. It'll be very interesting, but yeah, I think absolutely. It's your decision, and your thoughts, and yeah, nobody should be able to tell you how you should or shouldn't be, reacting to things.
Yeah, I think that's something I was so bad at before I was ill, like trusting myself and trusting that I knew the right thing, to do. I think I did a lot of doing what people do, what you're supposed to do in situations, rather than actually what was right for me. And that's kind of, it's made life much easier for me now, because I'm so much more sure about what I want to do. And I think, everything I'm doing, I feel good about, I feel much better about my choices now. So I think you are forced to learn that when you're ill, like, what is it that I want or need in this situation? Because if you don't, nobody else is going to figure it out, because how can they? So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there was something really interesting that you said a moment ago about, I think you were saying how you were more sensitive to certain things. And I'm curious about this because, having been through this experience and, have now learned to listen to my body in a way that I very much wasn't before, I'm much more aware of it talking to me all the time. That sounds really strange, doesn't it? But I listen to myself, to my body much more. So I notice much more than I did before. So now I'm like, oh, my breathing is not as good as yesterday, or oh, I feel a pain here, or all these things. And I instantly will go, oh, is it long COVID back? Oh, is this bad? And I'm wondering how much of this is just me noticing more because I'm listening more.
So interesting. And then also with that, getting that balance, because that was something I found hard when I was first coming out of recovery, was not, conversely, thinking too much about what my body was doing and going for things, trusting myself that I could go, because it's a different mindset. Once you start recovering, you can push yourself a bit more, and it's not all about rest. It is also about fun and also about what you want to do with your time. And that's lovely. It's so lovely to get that back. But I think it does take a little bit of adjusting. You don't want to live in fear. And I think that's really important. When you've recovered, you deserve to do the things you want to do and to not be frightened all the time.
Yes, and yeah, that's something I'm currently going through at the moment. And like you say, it's an adjustment, isn't it? When you've been ill for so long, and every kind of bit of energy and every single task has to be very much accounted for and budgeted. And if you do just a tiny, tiny bit too much, then that's it for however long. And then moving past that into this kind of, I don't have to think about pacing, but also being aware that actually everybody should be mindful of what they're doing. So it's like you say, it's a bit of a balance of trying to work out what quote unquote normal is and what it looks like, because it's almost like we've forgotten, or we've had to readjust so much into the illness that actually coming out of it, well, it's a thing, isn't it?
Well, especially for you getting ill right at the start of the pandemic, the world is totally different now from it, when you were last healthy. So, and everybody's more stressed. Everybody's got more health stuff, that I'm just really noticing that. And like we said, there are some positives with that. Maybe people are more mindful, kinder, but I think the world is different and people's values are different now as well. So it's not going to look the same.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah. So I would love to hear, what advice might you give to yourself, kind of either at the start or, before the start of your kind of long COVID journey?
Be very different advice depending on if I already had COVID or not, I think. Because if it was before, I would be like, quit your job, first of all, like number one on the list, and just take some time. But I know I wouldn't listen. So this is the problem. I think I had to go through it. I feel like it was, for me, it was inevitable. Don't think that's the same for everyone, but I just was in a rut, on a path. In terms of after I got ill, especially straight after I got ill, I would love to be able to go back to myself and just reassure myself that I'm not on my own. I'm not as isolated as I feel. People do love me and I do love people. It just feels like that right now. And that everything is temporary, I think, is the key, because it feels like it's forever. And your days feel so much longer when you're ill. But actually, now that I'm out of it, I can't even remember really what it was like to feel like that. So I think, yeah, you're not going to be in there forever is the main thing I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very difficult to imagine not being ill when you are so ill. And I think that can be such an awful place to be. I mean, you very briefly touched on mental health earlier, and I think for me, this has been a big thing. When you are feeling that bad, mentally, you're then also feeling that bad. And then the two kind of end up, kind of negatively impacting each other, to this point where it's very difficult to even have any hope that you will get better at all, or even to see any improvement. And that can be a pretty dark place to
Yeah.
be, I think.
Yeah. That's something actually I didn't mention before about things that help, but that I would really strongly recommend is getting therapy if you can. I will give you the link actually for this. I went through a charity, so my session, £25 a session. It's obviously, affordable. And I was able to have, lots and lots of sessions. Had I think about 20 in the end. And I was in that position. They base it on kind of household income, and at the time I wasn't really earning, so it does depend on your financial situation. But there are other charities as well, and I just think having someone to talk it through with is just such an important part of recovery, and having somebody who's not got a vested interest. Because the problem with my parents, as much as I love them, they were upset for me every time I got iller. Of course they were. They wanted me to be well, and I think that puts a certain amount of pressure on you. Whereas if you're talking to a therapist, you can properly vent and discuss things. So yeah, I'll definitely give you that link because I think that's so important for people.
I would totally agree with that. I remember saying, oh, I don't need to talk to somebody because that's what my partner's for. I can dump all of this on him, and that's great. I'm lucky to have him. And I remember someone saying to me, partly, that's not very fair to him, and also he's not useful for that. He's there in a support role and he's great, but you need to talk to somebody who actually is kind of trained in that area in order to get anything out of it. And again, that was something that was very, very helpful for me, and I was really glad that I made that decision, and I wish I'd made it about 18 months earlier.
Yeah, maybe that's what I would say to my pre-COVID self, actually. Go and get some therapy.
Yeah, maybe. But I suppose it comes back to, everybody's got stuff, haven't
Definitely.
they? I mean, I'm still seeing mine, and I at the moment I still feel like I have the stuff to bring to her all the time.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been really great speaking to you and hearing your story. And I really hope it's been helpful for others who are struggling as well, because as we say, it can be a very lonely, dark place to be in. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.